But over 2 days, question after question, he chose not to answer. In fact, he did that 252 times.
There's a magic in a child who wakes each morning with wonder, whose laughter feels like the heartbeat of home. Poppy Worthington was that magic, until trust was betrayed in the darkest way. Critical evidence slipped away, a father's account raised more questions than answers, and the truth was buried in silence. This is the story of a vibrant life, remembered not for the justice she found, but for the justice she never did. Poppy Iris Worthington entered the world on October 20th, 2011 in the town of Barrow-in-Furness in northern England. She was part of a large family, one of 6 children, and shared a special connection with her twin brother. Those who remember her describe a child full of joy and energy, outgoing, spirited, and quick to bring laughter to those around her. She was often the earliest riser in the household, eager to greet her loved ones and begin the day with enthusiasm. Her mother, whose identity has not been made public for legal reasons, became a parent while still in her teens. By the time she met Paul Worthington in 2009, she was raising 3 young daughters. Paul, who was older than she, soon became part of the family, and together they welcomed a son before later having Poppy and her twin brother. The relationship between Poppy's parents was described as complex. At times, Paul lived with the family. At other points, he stayed elsewhere. Despite the changes in living arrangements, Poppy's mother often referred to him as her closest friend and spoke of the support he gave the children. Eventually, the household, which now included 6 children, settled in a modest 3-bedroom home in Barrow, a property rented from Paul's sister, Tracy Worthington. At the beginning of December 2012, little Poppy hadn't been feeling her best. She had cold-like symptoms, was extra tired during naps, and was experiencing some stomach issues that came and went. On the afternoon of December 11th, she seemed especially uncomfortable. During lunch, she suddenly cried out and leaned back in her high chair, appearing to have stomach pain. Her mother comforted her, gently rubbing her belly. Not long after, Poppy's stomach upset continued, and her mom grew increasingly concerned. That evening, around 7:30 p.m., Poppy was tucked into her crib that she shared with her sister. Her mother went downstairs to rest on the couch, while Paul remained upstairs. Sometime after 2 a.m., Poppy's mother remembered hearing her daughter cry out again in a way that reminded her of the discomfort from earlier that day. She also noticed movement upstairs before Paul came down to let her know that Poppy wasn't feeling well and needed a diaper change. A short while later, Poppy's mother was startled awake once more. This time, Paul was carrying Poppy in his arms, and the toddler appeared unresponsive. Emergency services were immediately called, and CPR was attempted while waiting for paramedics. Sadly, despite all efforts, Poppy tragically did not survive. Poppy was rushed to Furness General Hospital, but despite every effort made by medical staff, she was sadly pronounced deceased at 7:07 a.m. One of the doctors who had worked tirelessly to save her described the situation as unlike anything he had previously encountered in his career. When investigators spoke with Poppy's father, he explained his version of events from the night before. He said that around 9:30 p.m., he had gone upstairs with his laptop, spent some time online, and later went to bed. He claimed that not long after falling asleep, he was awoken by Poppy crying. According to him, he went into her room, found her distressed, and brought her into his bedroom to comfort her. He stated that when Poppy showed signs of discomfort, he partially unfastened her onesie to check if she needed a diaper change. Discovering that she did, he placed her on the bed, went downstairs briefly for a fresh diaper, and returned moments later to find her already asleep. Believing she would soon be awake for the morning, he decided not to disturb her. However, just a short time later, he said he reached over, touched her arm, and realized something was terribly wrong. At that point, he alerted Poppy's mother, and emergency services were called immediately. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts.
Later, when specialists carried out a post-mortem examination, several concerning findings were brought to light. Medical professionals identified internal issues and previously unnoticed concerns that suggested Poppy may have been in an unsafe environment. While the exact medical cause of her passing could not be determined, her pass was ultimately classified as unnatural. The coroner's conclusion pointed to troubling circumstances that required further investigation. Although authorities were notified almost immediately after Poppy's passing, no formal interviews with family members took place until August of 2013. Prior to that point, investigators collected DNA samples from both parents. One of the samples raised questions, but Paul explained this as being the result of his attempts to clear Poppy's airway while waiting for emergency responders, followed by using the restroom before washing his hands. It was not until the summer of 2013 that Paul Worthington was taken into custody in connection with concerns surrounding his daughter Poppy's passing. Yet despite this development, no formal charges were ever brought forward. From the outset, questions had arisen about how the case had been managed, and these concerns only grew stronger over time. One of the earliest issues noted by observers was how the home had been treated in those critical first hours. Rather than safeguarding the entire property as a potential source of information, only one bedroom was restricted. The rest of the residence remained open to family members, including children, which inevitably complicated any future analysis. Another point of contention involved Paul's personal laptop. He had told investigators he had been using it the night Poppy became unwell, but the device was never taken into police possession. According to Paul, it was later given to a friend, removing what could have been a significant piece of evidence. Despite officers being present at the home, certain household items that could have been important later were not preserved. One example was the last diaper Poppy had worn. Her aunt, Tracy Worthington, who rushed to the property after receiving a distressed call from Poppy's mother, noticed it sitting near the fireplace. Believing it to be unsanitary and unnecessary to keep, she threw it away without further inspection, an action that would later raise questions about the loss of potential evidence. By the time Tracy arrived, both Poppy and her father, Paul, had already been taken to the hospital by ambulance. Poppy's mother shared her own account of events, telling Tracy that her daughter had been awake in her crib, upset but not crying loudly, when Paul first checked on her. According to this version, he went downstairs for a bottle, returned to settle Poppy, and soothe her by rubbing her back. Something later prompted him to look in on her again, and it was then, the family said, that he realized she was unresponsive. In the aftermath, Tracy publicly defended her brother. She expressed her belief that Paul was innocent, emphasizing that critical mistakes by investigators had left him unable to clear his name. In her words, evidence had been misplaced or overlooked, creating lasting consequences for both the case and Paul's reputation. She remarked that regardless of how those closest to him viewed his character, the public association would likely remain, leaving him burdened with a label she insisted was undeserved. When Paul Worthington first gave his account to officers about the night Poppy tragically passed away, authorities did not initially treat him as a person of concern. Even though there were slight variations in his retelling and differences compared to what Poppy's mother described, the matter was considered by one officer to be a deeply distressing family situation, rather than grounds for further criminal inquiry. As a result, early opportunities to look more closely at the inconsistencies were missed. The investigation later became even more complicated due to differing professional opinions. Two separate pathologists reviewed Poppy's case, but they reached contrasting conclusions. One expert indicated that certain findings raised serious concerns and emphasized this to investigators, while another specialist suggested the same indicators could be explained by natural medical conditions. The second opinion further noted that some of the visible concerns might have developed after Poppy's passing, given the time that had elapsed before the examination. These conflicting views created uncertainty at a critical stage of the inquiry.
Questions about the handling of the case also extended to the conduct of law enforcement itself. Two officers involved were later scrutinized for professional failings. One retired before further action could be taken, while the other left the force after being demoted for poor performance. These outcomes highlighted how procedural shortcomings and lapses in judgment left the case without the clarity that Poppy's family and the wider public deserved. By the time Paul Worthington was eventually arrested, the case had already suffered significant setbacks. Several important items had not been preserved in those critical early hours, which meant investigators were left without enough evidence to proceed with charges. The officer who initially directed the inquiry later reflected on these events, admitting that errors had been made, but insisting his team had worked under difficult conditions. He explained that the presence of conflicting medical opinions had complicated their decisions, and while mistakes occurred, he believed at the time their actions could have been defended as reasonable. His words carried a tone of justification, but also of quiet regret, an acknowledgement that what was lost could never be retrieved. In the years that followed, the shortcomings of that investigation were addressed more openly. The chief constable of Cumbria Police publicly acknowledged that Poppy had been let down. He explained that the first responsibility of any officer in such circumstances is to secure the scene and safeguard all possible evidence. Instead, there had been lapses in oversight, and as a result, items that might have proven crucial were never collected. He described this as a fundamental failure, one that allowed doubt and uncertainty to take root from the very beginning. The admission was stark, and it underlined the devastating reality that a family searching for answers had instead been left with even more questions. In December 2014, hopes briefly rose when an inquest was ordered into Poppy's passing. Families often see these proceedings as a chance to finally establish some clarity, but the outcome here was disheartening. After only a few minutes in court, the ruling was delivered. Poppy's passing would remain unexplained. The judge concluded that the findings of an earlier private review were sufficient and chose not to revisit the matter in detail. For many observers, this moment was deeply frustrating. The child at the center of it all, a little girl whose life had barely begun, was left without a definitive explanation for what had happened to her. And perhaps the most difficult irony of all was that the very system designed to provide answers had instead closed the door far too quickly. In July 2015, the High Court ruled that a new inquest needed to be held after the original proceedings were found to have been handled improperly. This second review was far more detailed, with the judge hearing from multiple medical specialists who did not always agree in their interpretations. After weighing the evidence, the judge concluded that concerning actions had likely occurred involving Paul Worthington and his young daughter Poppy. However, he stated that these actions were not believed to have been the direct reason she passed away. Instead, it was suggested that Poppy's tragic passing was the result of unsafe sleeping conditions that limited her ability to breathe, circumstances worsened by the fact that she had not been feeling well at the time. The heartbreaking conclusion was that she was placed down to rest and later covered, but by morning she had not survived. Despite the deeply troubling picture this painted, the court determined that there was not sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against Paul or any other individual. For Poppy's loved ones, this outcome left many painful questions unanswered, adding to the weight of their grief. The following year, in June 2016, a serious case review sought to examine not only what had happened in Poppy's final moments, but also the broader family history that had shaped her short life. The report revealed that Poppy's mother had endured a difficult childhood marked by instability, loss, and a cycle of neglect stretching across generations. It was also disclosed that Paul Worthington had once been in a relationship with a woman to have taken advantage of Poppy's mother, raising further concerns about the relationships and environments surrounding the family. Records showed that child protection agencies had previously been involved with relatives on the mother's side, but had formally stepped away in 2007. Paul, too, had prior contact with services, though his case had been closed as early as 2003. The review acknowledged that while professionals had been aware of vulnerabilities within both family lines, long periods without oversight meant that emerging risks went unnoticed. In the end, the report stood as a sobering reminder of how fragile safety nets can be when families in distress slip through the gaps of the system. In January 2013, although a pathologist raised concerns that Poppy may have been subjected to SA, Child Protection Services decided not to move forward with additional steps at that time. It was only months later, in October of that year, that the remaining children living in the household were taken into care. Meanwhile, the local council sought to limit public discussion by attempting to restrict reporting on Poppy's passing for a period of 15 years, a request the court ultimately rejected.
In November 2017, following years of determination from Poppy's mother, a fresh inquest into her passing was officially convened. This hearing was far broader than those before it, drawing on testimony from 39 individuals, among them Paul Worthington. By then, Paul had been relocated under protective measures after receiving numerous, which reflected how emotionally charged the case had become in the wider community. Investigators also reintroduced a laptop he had used on the night Poppy was found unresponsive. Specialists carried out a meticulous review of the device, covering digital, physical, and forensic angles, but ultimately reported that nothing unlawful had been uncovered. While that finding closed one avenue of speculation, it underscored how much uncertainty remained and how difficult it was to untangle rumor from evidence in such a highly scrutinized case. The court also heard from a detective who had attended the home on the night Poppy tragically did not survive. His account noted that while no obvious visible concerns were observed on her, there were details within the environment that drew attention. He further acknowledged that because the case was not initially treated as a potential criminal matter, certain investigative steps were not taken. Items such as the bedding and the laptop were left in place rather than secured as evidence. In later reflection, those choices came to symbolize lost opportunities, moments when clearer answers might have been possible had the gravity of the situation been recognized sooner. For many listening, this was a painful reminder of how crucial early decisions can be, shaping not only the course of an investigation, but also the trust of a community seeking closure. When the 2017 inquest resumed, Poppy's father, Paul Worthington, was brought into the courtroom under the watch of police officers. Over the course of questioning, he chose not to respond to 252 separate inquiries, instead invoking his right to remain silent to avoid self-incrimination. His sister Tracy later explained that he had done so on the guidance of his lawyer, and added that, in her eyes, years of suspicion had unfairly overshadowed him. She said she needed no convincing of his innocence, believing he had been carrying a heavy burden throughout the process. By the end of the hearings, the court concluded that there were indications Poppy had experienced troubling circumstances before she tragically passed away, but that the failures in the original investigation meant there was not enough reliable evidence to proceed with criminal charges. It was an outcome that left a deep sense of unease, part closure, part frustration. For some, it showed how fragile justice can be when the earliest stages of an inquiry fall short. For others, it left them wondering whether truth itself had been buried beneath mistakes that could never be undone. Cumbria Police later issued a rare and candid statement of regret. The force acknowledged that its officers had failed in their duty to properly investigate the passing of a child, admitting that their approach had denied both Poppy and her family the clarity they deserved. They stated that their central responsibility should have been to provide a voice for the child who could no longer speak for herself. The admission was painful, humbling, and for many, too late. Yet it also stood as a moment of accountability etched into the public record. In March 2018, the Crown Prosecution Service formally announced that no charges would be brought against Paul unless new and compelling evidence came to light. This decision left Poppy's family caught in a limbo of grief and unanswered questions, forced to live with uncertainty long after the headlines faded. Poppy was laid to rest close to her home in Barrow-in-Furness, where she is quietly remembered with love. On what would have been her birthday in 2018, Paul was said to have left a card at her resting place, sharing that she was always in his thoughts. For some, the gesture was seen as tender. For others, it carried a difficult sense of irony. For everyone who followed her story, however, it was a solemn reminder of a child remembered with affection, and of a case that continues to echo with lessons about accountability, trust, and the importance of protecting the most vulnerable. This case shows why securing evidence and following proper procedures is vital. Overlooked items, conflicting reports, and poor oversight left too many questions unanswered. By learning from these failures, we can push for stronger investigations and honor Poppy's memory. What lessons do you think investigators should take from this? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.
It started like any other week, just a boy spending time with his dad. But when his mom's calls went unanswered, she knew something wasn't right. This had never happened before. She reached out, hoping someone would listen, but no one did. What if the signs were there all along, just not taken seriously? Rowan Milford came into the world on August 31st, 2017 in Michigan, bringing with him a light that seemed to make every space warmer. From the time he could walk and talk, he had a knack for turning ordinary days into something special. Those who knew him say he had a laugh that could fill a room and a sense of humor that could lift even the heaviest moods. Rowan's favorite color was orange, bright, bold, and full of life. Just like him, he loved Pokemon, enjoyed playing flag football, and was already showing surprising skill with a golf club. Recently, he'd lost his very first tooth, a milestone he wore proudly as proof that he was growing up. At 6 years old, he often joked about being taller than everyone, and it made him beam with pride. Rowan was surrounded by love from a big family. He had 5 older siblings, and together they were a lively group, laughing, teasing, and always in motion. Though his parents, Brandy and Michael, had gone their separate ways when he was still a baby, they both remained devoted to him. In time, Brandy remarried a man named Brian Poles, who, by all accounts, cared deeply for Rowan and embraced him as his own. Friends described their home as filled with affection and laughter, the kind of environment where a child like Rowan could thrive and just be himself. In 2020, Brandy and Michael began sharing equal custody, working together to make sure Rowan's world stayed stable and full of love. Their arrangement was simple, but steady. 1 week with Mom, 1 week with Dad, and the handoff always happened at 9 a.m. every Monday. According to the family's routine, it was Michael's turn to have Rowan starting the week of August 12, 2024. As always, Brandy brought her son to his father's home that Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m. The exchange went as planned, and Rowan, cheerful as ever, headed off to spend the week with his dad. But when the following Monday arrived, and Michael was supposed to return Rowan at the same time and place, no one showed up. Brandy called again and again, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. By just a few minutes past 9, an uneasy feeling settled over her, a kind of worry only a mother can understand. Michael had been unreliable before, but this time, something about his silence felt different. Trusting her instincts, Brandy reached out to the Isabella County Sheriff's Department, as she had done in the past when Michael failed to meet their custody schedule. She asked for a welfare check at his home on East River Road in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Deputies agreed to send someone out, but when they arrived, there was no response at the residence. Earlier that week, when Brandy had dropped Rowan off, she remembered seeing Michael's black truck parked beside a camper in the driveway. Now, both were gone. Officers assumed the father and son may have gone on a short trip together and decided there wasn't an immediate cause for alarm. No further action was taken that day. Still, Brandy couldn't shake her worry. As the hours passed, the sense that something was terribly wrong only grew stronger. She called the sheriff's department again, hoping they would check the property once more, but this time the person she spoke to seemed dismissive and unconcerned. Feeling unheard and increasingly anxious, Brandy and her husband Brian reached out to the Kent County Sheriff's Office for help. Unlike the previous call, the deputies there took the situation seriously. They even came to the couple's home in person to listen to their concerns. Unfortunately, they explained that because Michael lived in another county, more than an hour away, their hands were tied. To Brandy, every minute that passed without answers felt unbearable. Yet the system around her moved with frustrating stillness. Michigan's own state police guidance allows reports to be accepted after 24 to 72 hours, but exceptions can and should be made when a young child is involved. Still, rules and technicalities seem to overshadow urgency. Worse, Brandy learned that even an Amber Alert couldn't be issued, since Rowan was with a custodial parent, a policy that offered no comfort to a mother whose child hadn't been heard from in over a day. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts.
Determined to act, Brandy met with her attorney the next morning and filed for an emergency custody order, hoping a judge would recognize the seriousness of her fears. But after hours of waiting, Judge Eric James denied the request without explanation. Out of options, Brandy and Brian turned to the Michigan State Police, praying someone would finally take their concerns seriously. A report for a missing person was at last created, but even then, an officer from Isabella County called ahead to insist the matter was civil and not a cause for alarm. To Brandy, it was an unimaginable dismissal, especially now that more than 24 hours had passed with no word from her son or his father. Meanwhile, local deputies did continue to visit Michael's property. When they returned on Tuesday, they noticed that the camper Brandy had seen days earlier was now back, but positioned differently, tucked behind trees and brush. No one answered when they knocked. Later, a detective reached out to one of Michael's siblings, hoping she might have heard from him, but she too had been unable to make contact. Brandy had already explained that Michael sometimes used communication as a form of control, ignoring her calls, blocking her online and changing numbers to keep her from reaching Rowan. This wasn't the first time he'd made her worry, but deep down she knew this time felt different. She wasn't imagining it. There were times when Michael's actions seemed aimed not only at upsetting Brandy, but at unsettling the little boy they both loved. On several occasions, he without warning. Once, just before Rowan was meant to attend his older brother's wedding, Brandy, a hairdresser, knew how moments like that could shape a child's confidence. Rowan had been so excited for the event, but when he looked in the mirror afterward, he told his mother quietly that he thought he looked funny. It was a small moment that said so much, a glimpse of how easily a child's sense of self can be shaken when someone acts out. In time, Rowan began to share more of his worries with his mother. During visits with his father, he said, much of the day passed in silence while his dad slept, and meals often consisted of little more than toast. When Brandy saw the home herself, she grew uneasy. Believing Rowan's needs weren't being met, she reached out to Child Protective Services for help, but she later said her concerns weren't taken seriously. An official visit did take place, but only after Michael was warned in advance, giving him time to clean and prepare the house. Adding to Brandy's frustration, the same judge who would later deny her emergency custody request, Judge Eric James, had previously questioned her concerns about Rowan's care. He dismissed her worries about her son's diet and even criticized her for contacting Child Protective Services, saying the agency was meant for families in real need. To Brandy, those words deeply. She had only been trying to protect her child. The disputes between Brandy and Michael became relentless. They even ended up in court over which school Rowan should attend. Though Brandy had already enrolled, him and he'd been thriving there. Michael refused to bring him on his designated weeks, insisting on a different school. Under Michigan law, this was permissible, since Rowan hadn't yet turned 6, leaving Brandy powerless to enforce the arrangement. The situation had grown tense enough that Brandy began recording each exchange when she dropped Rowan off at his father's home. She later said it wasn't out of spite, it was because she felt uneasy. Wanting to help her son process everything, she enrolled him in counseling. His therapist noticed how reserved he became whenever his father's name came up. Brandy began to notice changes in her little boy, small things at first, then moments that were harder to explain. She kept reaching out for help, hoping someone would really listen. But somehow, their voices kept getting. There was another matter that deeply troubled Brandy, something she couldn't ignore. Michael kept items in his home that he was not legally allowed to have. His past decisions had already shown poor judgment, and now, with those concerns in mind, Brandy did what she thought was right. She reported it. But once again, her warnings seemed to fade into the background. Rowan's stepfather, Brian, shared those same fears. He spoke to officers explaining just how uneasy they both felt about Michael's state of mind. Yet, despite their pleas, there was little sense of urgency in the response. That moment, captured on an officer's body camera, would later serve as a quiet reminder of how many chances there were to step in, and how none of them came soon enough. Brian tried to keep his voice steady, but every word came from a place of deep worry. He spoke about the growing instability, about a man who seemed to be losing his sense of purpose, and how that made them both afraid for what might happen next. He explained that there were serious reasons to be concerned, things that should have never been ignored. The officer listened, nodding, assuring them that they'd do their best. But as the camera clicked off and the night grew quiet again, that uneasy feeling lingered. Because Brandy and Brian had done what they were supposed to do, they spoke up. They tried to prevent what their hearts feared most. And yet, somehow, it still wasn't enough. Brandy was running out of hope and time. When her calls and warnings seemed to fall on deaf ears, she turned to the only place left where she felt people might listen: social media. In a post filled with both fear and love, she pleaded for help, asking anyone who might know where Michael and Rowan were to come forward. She wasn't searching for answers anymore. She was searching for her child. Days passed with no sign of either of them. Then, early Wednesday morning, officers once again visited Michael's property, only to leave without finding anything new. But not long after they were gone, relatives from nearby arrived, unwilling to wait any longer. They searched the yard, the house, and eventually made their way toward the small camper tucked behind the home. When they couldn't see inside, they made the difficult decision to look through a window. What they found silenced everything around them. Within moments, emergency responders were called back to the scene. Both Michael and 6-year-old Rowan were later located by authorities, bringing the search to a heartbreaking close. Investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting that what happened had taken place long before anyone realized Rowan was in. A small digital device found inside the camper offered a quiet but telling clue. Its data had been completely erased early Monday morning. Beyond that, very little remained. It appeared that much of what could have explained those final moments had been deliberately removed, leaving behind only fragments of a timeline and far too many unanswered questions. There were still troubling questions about what truly happened in those final days, questions that only deepened as investigators reviewed the evidence. Certain findings appeared to suggest that the tragedy may have unfolded earlier than anyone first believed. Yet even within the evidence, inconsistencies appeared, leaving loved ones desperate for clarity and officials unsure of what to trust. Rowan's mother, Brandy, would later point out details that didn't seem to align, things that had changed between one visit and the next, and her concerns were never fully answered. The camper, a quiet space that once symbolized time spent together, became one of the central mysteries in the case. When officers initially arrived to check on Michael and Rowan, it was nowhere in sight. But hours later it was suddenly back on the property. Whether it had been moved or overlooked remains uncertain, and that uncertainty continues to weigh heavily on those who believe that precious time may have been lost. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, police returned to the property once again. Their cameras recorded what appeared to be signs of recent movement, small details that would later take on heartbreaking meaning. But the footage suddenly ended before any answers could be found. Brandy has since requested to see all of the recordings from that night, hoping for even a small piece of truth that might help her understand what happened in those crucial hours. Her requests, however, were denied. Brandy believes that what happened to her son occurred after she had already pleaded for help, when there was still time for someone to intervene. In her view, the warning signs were never taken seriously enough, and her concerns were repeatedly dismissed. She would later reflect on that painful reality, saying that a mother always knows when something isn't right with her child. She just wished someone else had listened when it mattered most. In the weeks before the tragedy, Brandy had been preparing for a new chapter in her son's life. She had recently moved to a new area, planning to enroll Rowan in a private Christian school, a place she hoped would give him structure, community, and peace. That decision meant revisiting the custody agreement with Rowan's father, something that had already been a source of tension. As the school year approached, the situation became increasingly strained. Brandy believes that when it became clear those changes were going to move forward, things took a devastating turn she never could have imagined. Those who knew Rowan describe him as a bright, gentle child, the kind of little boy who could light up a room with his energy and curiosity. He adored his mother and was known for his tenderness, often seeking comfort in her arms for even the smallest. Brandy remembers that now with both grief and gratitude that she had loved him openly and completely. His stepfather, Brian, spoke warmly of Rowan's kindness and manners, remembering how he impressed everyone with his sharp memory and love for numbers. Even at such a young age, Brandy has made a promise to her son that his story will lead to change. She now spends her days advocating for a new safety measure she calls the Rowan Alert, a system designed to protect children when custody exchanges take an unexpected turn. Her vision is simple but powerful. If one parent arrives more than half an hour late and no communication can be made, authorities would immediately step in to ensure the child's well-being. It's a safeguard she hopes will prevent other families from ever experiencing what hers has endured. Brandy is also pursuing accountability for how the case was handled, determined to make sure that silence and inaction never cost another child their future. Rowan's life was filled with the joy of childhood, curiosity, laughter, and dreams that were just beginning to take shape. He had been looking forward to starting flag football, proudly showing off his new gloves and cleats. That was the kind of excitement that defined him, full of hope, full of light. Now as his family prepares to honor his memory, Brandy speaks of her son's warmth and spirit, of the way he made every moment feel special. He was pure joy, she said, and he deserved so much more.
In the aftermath, Brandy has found strength and purpose. She's channeling her grief into advocacy, urging for stronger family evaluations and closer assessments in custody disputes, hoping no other child will ever face the kind of unseen risks her son did. Her message is simple but profound. Every concern should be heard, and every warning deserves attention. A service celebrating Rowan's life was held on August 29, 2024, at Cornerstone Church in Caledonia, Michigan. In honor of his favorite color, guests arrived wearing touches of orange, a small but meaningful way to remember his bright spirit and the joy he brought to those around him. My take on this case. When I think about Rowan's story, what stands out most are all the moments that might have changed everything. If only someone had listened, looked a little closer, or acted just a bit sooner. The warning signs were there, concerns were raised, but somehow the system moved too slowly when urgency was needed most. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was the result of gaps in communication, accountability, and the way families in conflict are supported. When a parent speaks out of fear or concern, those words should never be dismissed as emotion. They should be treated as signals. chances to reassess safety and protect a child before it's too late. Real prevention begins with stronger collaboration between law enforcement, courts, and those who advocate for families, and with faster action when a child's world suddenly shifts. Families need more than rulings. They need resources. They need compassion, not assumptions. If anything good can come from Rowan's story, it's this: that we remember to act early, to listen deeply, and to protect every child before it's too late. No parent should have to turn their heartbreak into a movement for change. And if you believe stories like Rowan's deserve to be heard, if you believe awareness can save lives, then make sure you're subscribed. Because every time we talk about cases like this, we're not just telling a story. We're helping prevent the next one.
So far, we only know the girlfriend of the boy's father is facing charges. However, detectives believe that there were others who knew that.
A mama's boy who loves Toy Story and knows every dinosaur by heart. In the spring of 2021, in Houston, Texas, he's staying with his father's girlfriend, someone the family never quite felt at ease around. Days pass, and no one outside the home can confidently say when he was seen. Stories change, timelines move, and every answer leads to another question. So what really happened inside that home, and why can't anyone give a straight answer? Samuel Olson came into the world on May 29, 2015, to parents who adored him in their own ways. Described as bright, gentle, and full of curiosity, he had a warm, affectionate nature that drew people in. He was especially close to his mother and found joy in the small things. Dinosaurs, for instance, were his world. He memorized their names with delight, and when he was given Woody and Buzz Lightyear figures, they rarely left his hands. His childhood should have been filled with security, routine, and laughter. By early 2017, Sarah and Dalton realized their relationship could not continue, and they chose to separate. Sarah became Samuel's primary caregiver and moved with him to her mother Tiffany's home in Center, Texas. Dalton retained rights to visit Samuel, though people close to the situation shared that his involvement was inconsistent. He was also ordered to contribute financially to support Samuel's needs. For a time, it seemed like the arrangement might hold, at least formally. But in January of 2020, after a scheduled visit, Samuel did not return to his mother's home. Dalton kept Samuel with him instead, and from that point forward, cooperation between the two households broke down entirely. Court orders were issued, yet they did not result in Samuel's return. The ongoing COVID unfolding across the country at that time made it even harder to get hearings and enforcement, stretching the situation out painfully. Sarah reached out everywhere she could for help. She contacted law enforcement, hoping they could assist, but was told the situation fell under civil court processes. She followed those legal steps again and again, only to discover that Dalton had moved multiple times, making Samuel harder to locate. Each move meant another new environment, more disruption, and no stable routine. Throughout it all, Sarah continued searching, trying to bring her son home where she believed he would be safe and surrounded by love. On May 31st, 2020, Sarah was finally able to see her son again when relatives gathered to celebrate his 5th birthday. Sarah had hoped that official paperwork would help bring Samuel back home, but those steps could not be taken that day due to restrictions at the time. Still, Sarah and her mother attended the gathering at Dalton's mother's home, wanting simply to be present for Samuel. When Samuel saw his mother after so many months apart, he wrapped his arms around her and told her that he knew she would find him. At that moment, Sarah believed she had to try to bring her son home herself. She quietly attempted to leave with Samuel, but Dalton realized what was happening and confronted her outside, placing himself in her path and claiming she had acted recklessly with her car. The situation intensified quickly. Sarah remained at the home, hoping to explain the events that had unfolded, but she was taken into custody following an incident involving her vehicle. Samuel stayed with Dalton, and for Sarah, the separation was profoundly painful. She had come so close to bringing her son back into her care. In the days that followed, legal orders were issued limiting direct contact between Sarah and Dalton, though communication about Samuel was still allowed. The weight of that moment lingered, leaving a lasting sense of loss and what might have been prevented. That same day, there were exchanges that deeply unsettled Samuel's family. Dalton's partner, Teresa Balboa, reportedly confronted Sarah's mother in a tense and alarming manner, while Dalton told Sarah she would not see Samuel again. Those words stayed with Sarah for months, leaving her anxious and fearful that her connection with her son might be permanently severed. Nearly 10 months later, on May 27, 2021, just days before Samuel's 6th birthday, Dalton reported that Samuel was missing. He and Teresa told investigators that a woman, accompanied by someone in a uniform, had come to their home and insisted on taking Samuel. According to their account, Teresa handed him over and only informed Dalton several hours later. Authorities were not contacted until late that day, raising questions about the timeline and decisions made during those critical hours. These inconsistencies would soon become a central focus of the investigation.
Teresa and Dalton did not live together. Their homes were more than an hour apart. Yet beginning April 30th, Samuel had been staying with Teresa at her apartment in Webster, Texas. Dalton stated that the last time he had spoken with Samuel was over the phone about a week earlier, on May 21st. The reasons for Samuel staying with Teresa were unclear, as Dalton gave differing explanations, sometimes saying it was to keep Samuel safe during a quarantine, other times pointing to his own long work hours and transportation limitations. The day after Samuel was reported missing, Dalton quickly filed an emergency petition seeking sole custody, accusing Sarah of being unfit to care for him. Investigators reached out to Sarah to determine if she had seen Samuel or knew his whereabouts. She explained that she had not seen her son in nearly a year and provided security footage, confirming she had stayed home the entire day in question. Authorities then issued a media alert about Samuel's disappearance. Though there was no mention of the uniformed individual Teresa had described, as investigators found no evidence to support that account. Reports indicate that the last time Samuel was seen by anyone outside the family was on April 30th, his final day at school. However, the school had not reported his absence to law enforcement, leaving a gap in understanding the timeline leading up to his disappearance. Dalton Nolan and his partner, Teresa Balboa, spoke openly about the fear and urgency that gripped them when Samuel went missing. Dalton described the experience as overwhelming, leaving him restless and emotionally drained. He emphasized that their every action, from sharing information to distributing flyers, was focused entirely on locating Samuel and ensuring his safety. The bond Dalton shared with Samuel was evident in his words, reflecting the love, care, and daily moments they had together, from learning new things to simply enjoying each other's company. Teresa echoed Dalton's dedication, highlighting the effort to cooperate fully with authorities and to follow every direction to aid in the search. Flyers were distributed across neighborhoods, and both remained actively engaged in contacting anyone who might have seen Samuel. Their determination to be part of the solution underscored their deep concern and hope that Samuel could be returned home safely. Family members also shared their perspectives. Tanya Olin, Samuel's paternal grandmother, recalled the last time she saw him and affirmed the love and care Dalton showed his son. She noted that he would never intentionally place Samuel in a dangerous situation. On the maternal side, Tiffany Farmaker, Samuel's grandmother, remembered him expressing discomfort with staying at his father's home and around Teresa, offering insight into how Samuel had felt during that period. These contrasting perspectives highlighted the challenges of understanding the child's experiences from multiple viewpoints. even though official reports initially suggested that Samuel was last seen on April 30th. His paternal grandmother, Tanya Olin, recalled seeing her grandson on May 2nd. She also mentioned hearing him in the background of a phone call roughly a week before he went missing. Tanya emphasized her belief in her son Dalton's care and devotion, stating that he loved Samuel deeply and would never intentionally place him in danger. Samuel's maternal grandmother, Tiffany Farmaker, offered a different perspective. She remembered that at his most recent birthday celebration, Samuel had expressed that he felt uncomfortable staying with his father and Teresa. He described both of them as being unkind, though he did not provide additional details. These insights painted a picture of a young boy navigating complex feelings and relationships during this time. On May 31st, 4 days after Samuel was reported missing, search efforts intensified. Houston police, alongside Texas EquiSearch, focused on the Webster apartment complex where Samuel had been staying with his father's girlfriend, Teresa, and her roommate, Benjamin Rivera. Despite their thorough efforts, Samuel was not located. Not long after Samuel had been reported missing, a tip received by Crime Stoppers directed authorities to a hotel in Jasper, Texas, over 100 miles from his father's home in Houston. Investigators arrived at room 106, where they encountered Teresa Balboa and a large storage container. Sadly, it was later confirmed that Samuel had passed away. The discovery prompted a detailed investigation into the circumstances surrounding what happened to him. Following this discovery, Teresa was taken into custody. She was initially charged with tampering with evidence, and her bond was set at $600,000. As the investigation progressed and more information came to light, the charges were upgraded to reflect the severity of the situation. Surveillance footage later revealed that Teresa, accompanied by another individual, had moved the container from a vehicle into the hotel room. This man was identified as Dylan Walker, who would later be known as the person responsible for contacting Crime Stoppers with the tip that ultimately led to Samuel. On May 30th, the day before authorities confirmed Samuel's passing, Dylan Walker shared that he had met with Teresa Balboa in the parking lot of a Walmart in Cleveland. She asked him to accompany her to a storage unit in Webster, where she retrieved a large container. Later, they traveled to a hotel in Jasper, Texas, where Dylan rented a room. After spending several hours there, he left Teresa in the hotel room. Concerned about unusual and troubling circumstances, Dylan chose to contact Crime Stoppers on his way home. Hoping to help resolve the situation, Dylan was later detained and faced charges related to evidence handling before being released on bond. Shortly afterward, another individual entered the investigation, Teresa's roommate and former partner, Benjamin Rivera, who also faced similar legal action and was eventually released on bond.
But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts.
Benjamin, Teresa's roommate, later spoke with authorities about events that took place in early May. He shared that on May 10th, he had a concerning conversation with Teresa regarding Samuel. Although he was away at work at the time, when he returned home he found that something was seriously wrong. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Benjamin assisted Teresa in addressing what had happened at the apartment in the days that followed. A few days later, under Teresa's direction, Benjamin helped move containers to another location. He drove to a storage unit in Webster, where they carefully transferred the container. Investigators discovered messages on his phone that suggested ongoing concerns. One text from Teresa to Benjamin requested a conversation before he returned to the apartment, and another message on May 12th indicated she intended to move within the apartment as maintenance was expected that day. Surveillance footage from a storage facility in Webster later showed Benjamin's truck arriving with the container on May 22nd, providing additional context to the timeline. A neighbor who moved in next door on May 11th recalled hearing unusual, persistent scratching noises around mid-afternoon that lasted 10 to 15 minutes, leaving uncertainty about the precise timing of Samuel's passing. At the time of Teresa Balboa's arrest, she had been out on bail following a prior incident in November 2020, which involved a charge related to Dalton. There had also been a protective order in place intended to limit contact with Dalton and Samuel, but the order had been breached. Despite these circumstances, just 2 months later, on January 2nd, 2021, Teresa publicly announced her engagement to Dalton, underscoring a complex and troubling series of events leading up to Samuel's loss. Many have questioned why Dalton allowed Teresa to care for Samuel after previous concerning incidents. Even with work obligations or other responsibilities, placing a child in the care of someone with a troubling history raises serious questions. When asked what he would say to Teresa after her arrest, Dalton simply asked why. "He loved you so much. I do not understand what happened. Why did you do this?" His words reflect the confusion and heartbreak of a parent grappling with an unimaginable loss. Teresa Balboa had 2 daughters of her own, but she had lost custody of them in 2019 due to concerns about her parenting. When a court hearing was scheduled to review her custody, she failed to appear. The father of those children, Alex Rizzo, shared that around May 23rd or 24th, Teresa reached out asking to visit. When he declined, she ceased communication. Alex believes she may have been trying to use the situation to avoid detection. He described knowing that Teresa had faced significant challenges in her life, but he never imagined that events could reach such a tragic point.
Teresa Balboa's trial was set for June 2023, but about a month beforehand, she accepted a plea agreement and pled guilty to a lesser charge of first degree, acknowledging responsibility for Samuel's passing. While he was in her care, she was subsequently sentenced to 52 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 26 years before becoming eligible for parole. Sarah also voiced frustration over the role of Samuel's father, Dalton, in the situation. She struggled to understand how he could not have been held accountable, given that he placed Samuel in the care of someone he knew had a history of concerning behavior. She noted that Dalton had not spoken to his son in over a week, had not seen him in nearly a month, and had accepted Teresa's account without question. Furthermore, he had failed to follow not 1, but 3 court orders related to Samuel's care. For Sarah, the lack of accountability added to the heartbreak and confusion surrounding her son's loss. Tiffany Farmica spoke publicly about Samuel, saying, "I don't want anyone to forget him. I know it won't bring him back. But maybe sharing his story can help protect another little boy in the future." Samuel Olson was laid to rest, and a private memorial service was held in his honor on Saturday, July 10th. My take on this case: the situation involving Samuel Olson is deeply saddening and leaves many questions about how it might have been prevented. In my view, a combination of concerning choices, unsafe circumstances, and missed warning signs created the environment for this loss. Past troubling behaviors, overlooked protective measures, and a lack of oversight all played a role. The warning signs were clear, leaving a young Samuel with someone who had a history of instability, not following court guidance, and insufficient check-ins on the child's well-being. To avoid similar situations in the future, stronger monitoring and accountability are key. Caregivers, authorities, and families must communicate clearly and act promptly if you want to see more stories where truth finally comes to light. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach more people who care about justice and remembrance.